Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, to our webinar on the role of US LNG for Germany. My name is Tim Kehler. I am the CEO and President of Zukunft Gas, the German gas advocacy, the voice of the German gas and hydrogen industry. On the occasion of having a very distinguished delegation of US representatives today in our capital, we decided to have an extraordinary webinar talking about the aspects of imports of US LNGs and, of course, how it's been produced and what kind of framework we will have to face in the future. Let me quickly introduce our guests. I start with Senator Mary Landrieu. She served in the United States Senate for 3 terms from 1997 to 2015. And during her 18 years in Senate, she chaired various committees, among them the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. And nowadays she's working as a senior policy advisor in various capacities. On my left-hand side, we have Toby Rice. He is the President and Chief Executive Officer of EQT, which is the largest producer of natural gas in the United States. And we have Chad Zamarin with us. He's Executive Vice President of Corporate Strategic Development at Williams. Williams Industries is, in our language, a TSO, a transport system operator in the US, but you are certainly dealing with much more gas than our TSOs are doing. You're transporting, processing and gathering about a third of the US gas consumption. And with us online from Washington, we have Fred Hutchison. He is President and CEO of the US LNG Association, the LNG Allies. Good morning to Washington, Fred.
Good morning, Tim. Good to see you all again.
Before we hear from Fred how the LNG exports from the US are developing, let me start with a couple of opening remarks. And I would like to begin my opening remarks by expressing my sincere gratitude to the United States and its LNG industry for supporting Europe in a crisis that was unprecedented since the Second World War. Putin was weaponizing gas during the last 1.5 years, trying to drive a wedge into the European community and, of course, trying to provoke social unrest by rising prices and other measures. As we all know, none of this happened last winter. The European governments were taking swift action in solidarity, and together with the gas industry, we saw that the gas storages were filled to the maximum. The import infrastructure was built up at unprecedented speed, and the independence from Russian imports was achieved due to these build-ups of LNG import terminals. In addition, we saw market interventions, so the customers were shielded from high prices, which at the end, of course, led to the situation that we are in a fairly manageable situation right now. But above all, of course, the flexibility of the US LNG industry has led to an increase of the LNG supplies to the European Union from under 20 BCM to over 60 BCM, filling the gap that was opened by the cut of Russian gas. So summarizing, we can say that Putin's threats are running into the void. And nowadays, the US are the second largest gas supplier to Europe, right after the Norwegian pipeline imports. And on the other side, Europe has become the most important destination of the US LNG exports. Where do we stand right now? Prices are low. Storage levels are currently in Germany at 77%, which is an extremely good figure. And import capacities at the coast of Germany are being currently expanded. As a matter of fact, this is, however, no reason for complacency. Several risks remain in the market. We see that the import infrastructure that we're currently using is used at almost 100% capacity, leaving no margin for errors. The next winter could be much colder than the last one. We might see that Asian demand could go up. And we shouldn't forget that we still get Russian gas, which might be cut as well. And something that we might discuss today as well, LNG supply capacity could be scarce in the next upcoming years. So our assessment is we are still in the middle of a crisis which continues to require our joint attention. The energy partnership with the US will see different phases. So in the next years, we have to secure the supply. We will certainly see that the imports coming from the US will increase. Research indicates that the US has the potential to become the most important supplier of gas to Europe. And the European gas demand certainly will remain high, as many European countries just have started the phase out of coal, or has to start with it, like here in Germany. However, we will see a shift in the relationship until 2050. We have the Green Deal. Europe wants to become climate neutral. Germany by 2045 as well. And this will require, of course, finding alternatives to emitting CO2 from burning natural gas. So to summarize, securing supply and complying with the climate targets will be the two driving forces of our future development of our developments. And with this as preliminary remarks, I would like to hand over to Fred Hutchinson to give us some insights on the US perspective of LNG exports to Europe. Fred, over to you, please.
Well, thank you, Tim. Good morning, everyone. My name is Fred Hutchison. As Tim mentioned, I'm the founder, president, and CEO of the US LNG Association. Our global brand name is LNG Allies. I'm pleased to join you this morning and delighted to tell you I'm not in the least bit jet lagged. Thank you also to my fellow American participants. You couldn't ask for a panel of more distinguished practitioners and policy thought leaders. Tim, are my slides up now?
They're good, yes.
All right, so let me go through these very quickly. It's about a 5-minute presentation. And there we go. It's a little bit about who we are. We're a trade association of the LNG export industry, major natural gas producers, and allied service companies. We're at about 20 members currently. And our mission is to help bring the climate, environmental, geostrategic, and economic benefits of US natural gas to the world. This is the place I always like to start. Many folks, if you only have the perspective of the current time, you miss the fact that over a long period of time, US natural gas consumption and production were very closely aligned. However, beginning in about 1986, our demand in the United States grew much faster than our supply did. And we had about a 20-year period of time when it looked like we were going to be an enormous importer of natural gas and build about a dozen big LNG import terminals. Then in about 2006, the shale revolution took place and unlocked the potential of shale gas, shale oil. And as you can see, over the last 16 years, while the demand in the United States has grown dramatically, we also, supply has grown much faster, and as a result, net exports have fallen. Now here is a slide which shows where we are in assessing how much gas the United States has to supply our needs and to supply the world. And this is an estimate that's updated every 2 years. We're expecting the 2022 numbers to be out shortly. But as you can see, the United States has approximately a century of gas for use. This is a remarkable chart. This shows the growth from essentially zero to about 12 billion cubic feet per day. To convert that to cubic meters per year, It's approximately a factor of 10, so it's about 120 BCM is our current production. And now that all 7 of our LNG export facilities are producing, our statistical agency expects that to continue to grow and to approach 150 billion cubic meters by 2025. As Tim mentioned, US LNG is really unique around the world. We have no destination restrictions. So if a cargo leaves the Gulf of Mexico, one of the export facilities, gets out in the middle of the Atlantic and somebody wants to buy it in the Pacific, the cargo can be diverted and will go wherever the market needs it. That's been very beneficial for Europe because in the last 18 months, as you can see, the dark blue bars on this particular chart shows just how dramatically US LNG exports have grown and gone from Asia to Europe. We also serve the South American market, which is the only major market in the world that's in the South. Asia, North America, and Europe are all in the Northern Hemisphere and all experience the same winter. This is a chart that I'm extremely proud of. It shows where we were in March, and look at where we are in number 5, right? It's UK, Netherlands, Spain, France, and Deutschland. It's just amazing. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, India are still on that list. Some of those customers, most of them buy directly from the United States, so they're able to take whatever cargoes they need directly. There's another astonishing chart. This shows how capacity at the US LNG export facilities has grown. That little orange flag kind of in the middle that says 1st April 2023 obviously gives you some idea of where we are currently. Until the very end of 2022, that growth was pretty steady and very dramatic in the United States. However, what I really want you to see as you look at this, on the top of that black bar as to where we are currently, which is at capacity. No more LNG is possible, no more greater quantity of LNG could get on the water before pretty close to the end of 2024. So for at least another 18 months, we're at about capacity, but then that steep increase continues to grow. What's shown on this chart are just the projects that are under construction or taken a final investment decision. We have several other projects that are extremely close. From 2028 through the end of the decade, we expect substantial growth. All participants in this webinar will receive a copy of this deck. In fact, Tim, I think I'll send you the longer deck, which has a lot more slides in it, give folks even more context. This is a particularly astonishing set of statistics. We currently have about 144 billion cubic meters of projects that are operating, another 100 million tons under construction, almost 200 that have been permitted but are not yet underway, and 56 that are pending before our regulators. That puts us at a point where that 494 in the total on the bottom of that chart, on the bottom of that column, exceeds the world market. Global market's about 450 billion. Well, I know where we are from million tons, but we are that number exceeds the current market. So an amazing story in a short period of time.
Thank you very much, Fred Hutchinson, for these insights from absolute gar nichts to 5th place. And looking at these remarkable figures, we shouldn't forget that a lot of gas that has been shipped to the Netherlands and Belgium also finds its way to the German market, which is certainly the biggest market that has to be served in the European Union. Senator Landry, if we look at the political landscape here, you as an observer of global policies, You had some talks here in Berlin so far. What is your impression of the state of play in the political debate, in particular in terms of energy policies here in Germany?
Well, first of all, let me just say how pleased I am to be with these two wonderful colleagues and to help represent PAGE, which is an amazing and wonderful and dynamic organization that's relatively new, but has an amazing message, not just for our country, but for the world. You'll hear more about that. And also Natural Allies, which is a great coalition that also came together recently in the United States to promote within the United States and around the world the benefit of natural gas for several reasons. One, its reliability to us domestically and potentially to the world through our export capacity. Two, to meet our climate goals. We see gas, natural gas, clean natural gas as a partner to renewables and part of the solution for a global climate action. I know not everyone in the world thinks that, but we strongly believe that, and we'll explain why. And so this is really an important trip to Germany, one of the most, if not the most important country in the European Union, clearly the largest, one that's on the front line of this threat from Russia, but it's not the only country at threat. Every democracy in the world right now is at threat from Russia and countries like it. So having served in the Senate for 18 years and chaired the Energy Committee, I could not be happier to represent in some way, directly and indirectly, these organizations and companies that represent what I think is the future for energy in the world, not just in Europe and not just in the United States. So we'll talk more about the details of that. But our meetings, it's been surprisingly, because I was a little nervous, to be honest. Mm-hmm. I was really a little nervous, to be honest, because the parties are so different here, you know, from the Green Party to this party to the Conservative Party. And I wasn't sure how our message would be received, but honestly, the meetings we've had in Berlin over the last 2 days have been very positive from different aspects of your government. So we're encouraged, I think.
What was the biggest surprise to you?
Well, we met with one of the leaders this morning of the Green Group, your former Minister of the Environment, and I thought he would be pushing back. But he was listening in, and he was saying, you all are telling me that you can be low carbon solution. You're telling me that you can be green and part of our green plan. And we said, yes. And he said, I want to learn more. So go ahead, Toby.
One thing on this, and then I want to jump into sort of PAGE and what we do.
Exactly. Yep.
You know, in this past year, I think there's been some events that have taken place that have caused people to have to take stock of where they're at in the world and the plans that they're going on. And what did we learn from this conflict in Ukraine? We learned that the environment's important, but we also learned that energy security matters. And without energy security, you cannot transition. And the question needs to be, well, what's the best way to get your energy security? Look where the world turned to find their energy security. They turned to American energy. They turned to American LNG. And so I think that is a foundation. As long as we have open minds, and then you will be able to see that there are really amazing opportunities that are in front of us, and the path to a lower carbon future that's cost affordable and reliable is going to come with a foundation of natural gas, more natural gas, not less. But this is a core tenet of what we're preaching with the PAGE organization.
And I would say we've found that our strategy is not incompatible with the German strategy. It's actually very complementary. You know, we want to decarbonize in the United States. We want to drive down emissions. We also want to provide energy security and reliability. And so I think we're recognizing, and it's great, you know, you think about what Germany has from a gas industry perspective, very similar to the US, has had an incredibly successful ecosystem of industrial use, of home heating and power generation. We've created a value chain in both countries that demonstrates that you can produce energy far from where it's consumed, you can move it to where it's needed, you can store it in vast quantities, and then you can dispatch it when and where it's needed. That's the holy grail of the energy equation. And now it's just about how we take what we've learned to not only solve our near-term energy security and decarbonization goals, but then collectively really focus on the 800-pound gorilla, which is there will be more coal burned in the world this year than any year in the history of the planet. And the only way, if you want to solve, it's not about Europe, it's not about the US. If you want to solve global emissions and the climate crisis, we've got to take what we do in the US, what Germany knows how to do in the natural gas industry, and we've got to take that to the world stage and displace foreign coal and dirty fuels so that we can drive down emissions globally.
Ladies and gentlemen, by the way, if you want to ask questions to our panelists, feel free to put them into the chat, and also please feel free to write them in German. We shouldn't have an issue bringing it into the discussion in English here. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat. But I think we have many questions to discuss. As you're operating or moving a third of the US gas from the various sources to the consumers, what kind of challenges are you facing? Do we have enough capacity in terms of pipelines in the first place?
Absolutely, a great question. The answer is no, but there are some good signs coming from the United States. The Inflation Reduction Act will not only stimulate additional renewable and electrification capacity in the US, but there's a recognition that alongside that, we need additional gas capacity. The US works a lot like Germany, where we have a lot of renewable energy. The only way that we balance our grid is through the use of natural gas as the enabler for having those more intermittent resources. So what we want to do in the US is accelerate renewables and electrification and use natural gas as an enabler to accelerate those goals in the near term. So we need more pipeline capacity to do that. Permitting reform was included in just the last 2 weeks. There was a bill passed in the US to increase the debt limit. An important pipeline that EQT will leverage and others was part of that package. There's additional permitting reform that we're hopeful will get passed later this summer. So there is a recognition and there's a need. We've got to get back to building infrastructure. So we do need more capacity in the US. And then the other thing that we're focused on in the midstream sector, and Toby can speak about the whole value chain as well, and about EQT and production. But we recognize that methane is an issue that has to be addressed. The good news is we know how to do it. We're talking about fugitive emissions that for the most part we control. We're not talking about leaky systems. We're talking about systems that were built and operated in a way that didn't treat methane as a greenhouse gas and as a climate issue. We now recognize that issue. And so we're rapidly focused on decarbonizing the infrastructure in the US. So we move a third of the US natural gas. We have one project today we're working on to build carbon capture and storage that will remove 20% of our emissions, just a single project. And you imagine, more of those projects taking the emissions out. Our goal is, and Paige, and we're talking about this, is to deliver net zero gas domestically and deliver net zero carbon gas globally through our LNG exports.
Let's stick a little bit with capacity before we move into the question of emissions. And I would like to direct a question to Fred. You mentioned or showed us the forecast of LNG capacities. Some are already commissioned, some are under construction. So what is your impression? Will we see enough capacity for liquefaction, for export? And what are the challenges that the different projects are currently facing?
Well, I think, Tim, it's really important to define the term short term. So over the course of the next 18 months, we're in the season now, which we call the shoulder season. Projects go through routine maintenance. So we're down a little bit in production currently, but I fully expect as we go through that period of time, we'll be operating flat out for much of the next 18 months, assuming there's no weather-related events, assuming there's no other kind of extraordinary events in any of these facilities, we'll be producing 13, 14 billion cubic feet of LNG per day from the United States for export. But that's going to be it until very late 2024, early 2025. Then that chart shows you that we've got enormous growth in the 2 years after that. 25, 26 look to be amazing. If we can keep that going right up through the end of the decade. Medium term, in my mind, is a lot of relief, a lot of possibilities. Longer term, it's still really important. Got a lot of projects shovel ready. We just need to sign the deals that'll get them built.
And can I just
Yes,
jump
please,
in
go ahead.
here? And I want Toby to really jump in here because it's really important, I think, for Europe and the world to understand the capacity of the United States.
That's what I just wanted to ask. Exactly.
How big this is. Now, Fred is focused because his association on the projects that are in permitting in different stages, but I'd like Toby to explain the scale of this and why this is so important for the security of democracies around the world. Go ahead.
But let me wrap it into a question because well, we learned from Fred, the US has turned from a net importer to an exporter 7-8 years ago. Is that a sustainable position at all, or and how does domestic consumption come into play here?
Tim, 15 years ago, the United States found itself in the same position that Europe is in today. We were energy dependent on others, and it was a major problem. And that's one of the reasons why I got into this industry, was to help bring energy independence to America. And we had a big campaign back then, Drill Baby Drill. And this was a really daunting crisis. But how did this industry, specifically the American oil and gas producers, respond? We responded with really amazing innovation, collaboration, risk-taking. And through all that hard work, we cracked the code on shale. And that was a miracle. And to be able to figure out how to bring commercial volumes of oil and gas out of a rock that has less permeability than the pavement that we walk on. True miracle. And with that innovation, we've gone from being energy dependent to being an energy powerhouse, thanks to that shale. Now we enjoy energy independence, and we are making significant progress as it relates to our climate goals. We have our energy security, but when we pick our heads up and look around and say, well, if we want to continue, if we want to meet the climate goals of the world, how are we? Just what we do in the United States is not enough. So when we step back and ask the bigger question, what can the United States do, not just to lower emissions within our borders, but what can we do to lower emissions outside of our borders? What can we do to provide energy security outside of our borders as well? And the answer to that is the reason why we started PAGE. What we can do, PAGE stands for the Partnership to Address Global Emissions. And what we're doing is providing energy solutions that will lower global emissions outside of our borders and provide energy security for the world. And the biggest opportunity is taking advantage of the shale revolution that took place in the United States. We are barely scratching the surface with that. We have the ability with that shale, with the inventory that's already been explored, but not yet developed, to increase production an incremental 50%. That would allow us to 50%.
Okay.
That would allow us to quadruple our LNG export potential to over 600 BCM. It's a massive opportunity. And that is going to, when that amount of natural gas is put on the world stage, it's going to replace foreign coal, which is the biggest source of emissions. It's going to have an environmental impact equivalent to electrifying every vehicle in the country, putting solar panels on every house in America, and also doubling US wind capacity combined. But what we're seeing from an energy security perspective, this amount of energy on the world stage is going to be the energy equivalent of adding 10 million barrels a day of clean energy. It's going to be like adding a Saudi Arabia of clean energy. It's going to be a decarbonizing force. It's a massive potential. So what we're out here doing is talking about some of these projects that we would like to get built and speaking with people to get the political support to help us ensure that these projects get built. And as we're talking to these customers, about big, bold energy solutions, there's really three things that I think are important when people are thinking about what energy solutions they should sign up for. We need to make sure that we're delivering the most cost-effective energy solutions, the most reliable energy solutions, and the cleanest energy solutions. And the type of projects that we're talking about delivering, from a cost perspective, we believe that we can put this gas on the doorstep of Europe for a cost of less than $12. Now, that's a pretty attractive price.
Just a comparison, what's the current?
$12 natural gas would be the energy equivalent of $70 oil. You can build some pretty amazing economies on $70 oil. So from a pricing perspective, and that would imply a $4 gas price in the United States. From a reliability perspective, this energy is being produced from inventory that we've already discovered. We know it exists. And at $4 natural gas, we have an inventory that we can sustain these production levels for over 30 years. So it's incredibly reliable. And the people that are producing this gas, it's not a petro dictator that could wake up one day and say, for political reasons, I don't want to sell this country energy anymore. The American oil and gas industry is made up of thousands of companies that are driven by market forces, not political forces. And the last point I'd say on the clean aspect of things, what Chad mentioned earlier, because of the environmental progress that we've made on eliminating methane emissions and cleaning up our carbon footprints, we are positioned to deliver these cargoes to the doorstep of Europe in a net zero fashion. So when you look at the cost, the reliability, and the carbon footprint of this product, it's absolutely tremendous. And the last solution that we're offering is once the natural gas gets here, and this is addressing the last point that people have is natural gas is a bridge fuel. Well, there's solutions that our companies are working on that other companies in Page are delivering that will take natural gas and transform it to a zero carbon solution. And this last group that just joined Page, Net Power, is the technology that's going to make natural gas and turn it into zero carbon electricity.
All right.
And it's absolutely amazing opportunity.
How does that work?
It's a power generation box where natural gas goes in and pure CO2 comes out the tailpipe.
Okay.
And that sets the table for carbon capture in a cost-effective way. And what people need to understand is we hear it a lot. People say, well, carbon capture is not new. It's been around for a long time. What's different now? Well, traditional carbon capture, air and gas would go into a box and air and CO2 would come out the tailpipe, typically at 5 to 10% dilute concentrations. It's not concentrated enough to move it and stick it underground. So what people have done historically is put on a scrubber unit and that would concentrate the CO2. But the problem is that process costs $100 to $200 a ton of CO2 to do that. It's dead on arrival if you're only getting $60 or $80 a ton. What Net Power does is instead of scrubbing the tailpipe, it scrubs the inlet. And so before the air meets the natural gas, it gets separated into pure oxygen. That meets the natural gas and out comes pure CO2. So that is, now the question is, can we get rid of the CO2 for a cost that's lower than the value we're receiving? And the answer is yes. We know how to do that. The missing piece of this whole puzzle has been giving this industry a pure stream of CO2. Once you do that, this industry will take care of that.
Toby, you just mentioned the political framework in the US and the multitude of different players. Mary, maybe you can give us some insights for the German audience on how US politics work in this field and what kind of risks or what kind of stability the US will provide in this area.
Well, let me say one thing first to just clarify. We've heard, and I'll get to that in a second, we've heard in every meeting, well, you know, Germany was so reliant on Russia, made Europe reliant on Russia. That was a mistake. We don't want to make that mistake again by relying on any one country. I want to underscore, when you all would, if you wanted to, take more natural gas from the United States, you're not relying on a country. You're literally like relying on thousands of democratic, freedom-loving, believing people that understand our markets, understand democracy, and have proven they will literally give their life for it. This is not relying on one country. It's relying on a partner that has a proven record with an industry that's thousands strong. That's number one. Number two, what is the politics of the US? It's not crystal clear because no politics is. We have different views in the country.
Democracies can produce a lot of surprises as well.
Yes, and democracies can produce a lot of fog, you know. So, but what's happened in the United States that I really want the world to understand, because it's just happened, is the industry in the United States has finally woken up in a big way. Now, we said they transport here 30% of the gas. The actual group that we're with in Berlin moves 70% of the gas in the United States of America, which is one of the largest volumes on the earth. Those are the people that are with us on this trip. And so what we're here to say is the industry is recognizing the world wants clean gas. We intend to give them the cleanest in the world. The world wants innovation. We intend to give it. The world, and we need partners. We want democratic partners. So the politics is a little dicey, but there are openings, and I'll prove it or give you evidence to suggest the IRA passed. overwhelmingly. Why did the IRA pass? Because the Republicans and Democrats, even though the Republicans didn't vote for it, there were a lot of businesses in the United States that supported that IRA because they understand the power of unleashing the innovation of America, led in large measure by Joe Manchin and, of course, by our president. And so once the industry could lean in and figure out, my goodness, this is a great opportunity for us, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the politics is clearing up. We just passed a permitting. And right after that bill passed, the day after, I made a few phone calls to some high-level folks that I still know because of my time there. And I said, are y'all going to get back to the table to figure it out? They said, oh, yes, we are ready to do another permitting. Okay. So the politics in the U.S. is sending signals that we believe in our industry. We believe our industry can do this. We want to partner with renewables. And look, we have nuclear. You know this in the United States. I know Germany doesn't.
We shut off.
But the U.S. believes in nuclear and advanced nuclear, and Bill Gates is leading that for the world and other people. But I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but our politics is clearing up.
Okay. Yeah, and I would just say, Tim, real fast, I do think this is an important time, and there is a convergence happening. It feels like in the United States that maybe hasn't been there in the last few years. There were very polar positions on issues. I think that the political environment is seeing industry step up and recognize we want to be a part of the solution. We have to be. We believe that if you want to achieve our goals, we have to be. I will say also, there is a lot of patriotic care for Europe in the United States. I mean, most of us trace our roots. My family traces its roots back to Europe. And so there is a lot of patriotic care for this relationship. And that's real. And I think that's an opportunity that we should be taking advantage of. And so our goal in coming over here is to create a partnership between Germany and the United States, between Europe and the United States, to take on our collective challenges together, to both drive our transition and decarbonization goals, but then also partner on taking on energy security for our friends and allies around the world. And the next challenge from a climate perspective, it's not about Europe, it's not about America, it's about how do we take care of 4 billion people that live in energy poverty around the world, and they're going to get their energy wherever they can get it. Today, they're getting it with coal. And we're burning more coal this year than any year in the history of the planet. Let's partner together, and that's our message. Let's partner together in solving that problem so that we can drive down emissions for the world, for the rest of the world.
Fred, let me please pick up a question that we have on the chat on the short-term perspectives of LNG supply. So we saw on one of your slides that there was a temporary slowdown of the export of natural gas in the second half of 22 and went up again in the first quarter of this year. What is your forecast for the rest of this year and the forecast for the rest of the upcoming winter, which is, of course, the most pressing and urgent question that we have over here in Germany?
Well, Tim, one of my favorite all-time movies, an American movie, is called Groundhog Day, right? And it's that day in early February 2nd, where this little rodent wakes up, and if he sees a shadow, there's 6 more weeks of winter. And I think almost entirely what will happen through the coming year and is weather dependent. And fortunately, we had a warm winter here. Europe had a warm winter. The volumes of US LNG that went to Europe, the extra volumes, almost all came from the volumes that China didn't take last year. So we're watching a number of things. We're watching the Chinese economy, how much LNG they buy. We're watching what will happen, obviously, as we get into the final quarter of the year. I would say that we are all still holding our breath a little bit. We're going to be running flat out and producing as much as we can. But everybody has to remember that when it comes to LNG projects, they are great big projects. And they're very, what I would characterize as lumpy, right? So you have incremental growth that happens all at once, and it's big growth. It's not like what EQ.T does when they bring another well online. If we could only be so fortunate, if we could take that incremental production, immediately put it on the water, it would be so helpful at this particular point in time. We could ramp up even more than we're doing. But that's just not the case, because There's
Yeah,
physical
Tim,
limitations on.
I mean, I think the point here is, I mean, LNG is going to be maxed out, and this, just like the regasification, you mentioned utilization is close to 100%. That is a scary place to be.
It is,
especially when
yep.
this is, it's being maxed out because it's so critically needed right now. And I think leaders are taking notice because our pipelines are full, our refineries are full, our LNG facilities are maxed out, and there's no breathing room. And
exactly.
So we need to take an attitude of, hey, when it comes to our security, building infrastructure is the representation of that. This is where it's okay to overbuild and provide that security, because when we lose the security, the financial penalties, forget about the loss of human life, the financial penalties can be enormous. And last year's energy bill for Europe is the perfect example, you know, where they've spent over almost
as a matter of fact, and there was just a question also in the chat. There's the big story, a big fear of stranded assets of infrastructure. Is that something that concerns you, or does it concern you more that supply wouldn't be met?
Yeah, so the stranded asset question is always interesting to me because one, the private organizations are going to be buying these assets.
It's your risk.
Yeah, and so we take that risk, and I think we take that risk because we know that natural gas can be transformed into a zero carbon solution. And there's multiple paths, whether it's through the application of net power to produce zero carbon electricity that's reliable and affordable, or if it's transformed into a zero carbon hydrogen product. At the end of the day, these pipelines are going to be utilized, and these natural gas LNG facilities are going to be utilized.
The LNG acceleration law in Germany is mandating everyone who's building an LNG terminal these days that this has to be transformed to green energy imports by the year 2043.
And Tim, important, and it's also a reason why you see the variability in the US LNG markets. We have the most flexible LNG model in the world. And if you think about where we can get incremental gas from at a global scale, it's either from Russia, Iran, or Qatar, or the United States.
Yep.
And so we need the United States to be a reliable supplier for global natural gas. It may be that we're sending natural gas in the form of LNG to Europe for the next 10 years, 15 years. If Germany meets its decarbonization goals, doesn't want to produce net zero power with natural gas, we know that the world is going to need natural gas for decarbonization. And the beauty of the US market is Germany doesn't have to commit to taking natural gas for 20 years. All we have to do is build capacity, and we can take that gas when we're ready. Let's achieve our transition goals, and then let's use that capacity to decarbonize Asia, which is really where the emissions are going to be long-term.
So the stranded asset argument is a bogus argument. It is not stranded assets. It's risk the private sector is taking, at least in the American model. And in the model that we have to sell gas to the world, you don't have to take it. And if you don't need it, you don't take it. And if you don't need it, but you want to take it, you can resell it elsewhere.
Yep.
So there's sort of like no downside to this, really. And also, when you put on top of that, it gives you security that you can't get, I don't think, anywhere else, unless you want to go do this with Iran. Or who else do we have?
Qatar or Russia.
Yep. Those are the choices. And if we don't, we need something that can help us build out renewables. We need something that can help build out renewables.
I do, and I hope Toby said this. I don't know if we'll get there, but one of the goals on this trip is we do believe in natural gas not being a bridge fuel, that it is a destination fuel, that we can, if we want to decarbonize at scale, we can decarbonize the natural gas value chain. And then we know Germany knows how to engineer things. Let's figure out how to use that. I say this often, we're not going to tear the roads out and build new roads for electric vehicles. Let's figure out how to decarbonize the natural gas value chain. Let's produce power with zero emissions. Let's convert natural gas into hydrogen and burn hydrogen. Let's figure out how to leverage what we've got.
One of the arguments that we're also hearing a lot, which creates quite a bit of reluctance to endorse US LNG, is methane emissions. Something that we hear quite often. Maybe Chad, you can give us some insights on what your company is doing to mitigate them.
I'm going to let Toby start, because I think let's start at the production.
Toby has a great story, and then we'll go back.
Yeah, so I'll tell you all what I told Secretary Granholm about 24 months ago. I told her to keep the bullseye on methane emissions because we're going to knock methane emissions out of the park. Since then, in the last 18 months, EQT has reduced methane emissions by over 70%. We did one thing, and that one was the big,
how much was that?
By 70%. It was over
70.
370.
Okay.
Over 300, that translated to about 350,000.
Within 24 months.
With that project took us about 18 months to get done. We know where the source of emissions are coming from in natural gas operations. It comes from one piece of equipment called a pneumatic device. This is a valve that allows us to move fluids around location. The good news is there's a replacement part, and we can replace that cost effectively. EQT had over 9,000 of these devices scattered across its 600 oil and gas producing locations. We replaced every single one of those in less than 18 months. We did it very fast. From a cost perspective, we did it at a cost of less than $6 per ton. So it's cost effective. We do it quickly. We put a white paper on our website, and others in industry are seeing that, yes, this is fast, this is cost effective. And what EQT is going to do is we are obviously set up to do the gas certification. This is a big message that we're putting out here for people that have concerns over the environmental performance of our products. We are willing to go through any certification and bring full transparency to our operations to give peace of mind to the way that we're operating. After the cleaning up of the equipment, bringing the certifications to the table, the last thing that we're doing is we have established a new coalition called the Appalachian Methane Initiative, and we are doing aerial surveys across the entire Appalachian Basin. So when we say our emissions are this, when somebody says, well, Tobe, what about the things that you aren't measuring, you aren't looking at? Well, we've got satellites in the sky that are watching over everything. And Appalachia is a pretty big place. We're going to be monitoring an area the size of France. So this is how serious we take this stuff, because we have nothing to hide and everything to showcase all the great work that we're doing. This industry is probably the most heavily scrutinized industry in the world, but unfortunately, we're also probably the most misunderstood. So we're going to be taking aggressive actions to show the world that we can produce the cleanest energy product.
And then when we take it,
so these are your actions, but maybe we can also learn a bit about the regulation that are in place. So this is not
this is not something that's being regulated,
and people,
but they're doing it voluntarily, but it could be regulated.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And people need to understand that when we're talking about expanding natural gas production, we're talking about that production is going to be coming from the basins where EQT operate. The Appalachian Basin is the biggest gas field in the world. And this is because it's the most productive, it's the most cost effective. It's also the most environmentally friendly, best responsibly produced gas. People need to differentiate from where they're getting their gas from, because it's going to be coming from the best gas in the world, which is Appalachia. That's a really overlooked point that is incredibly important. And we can make the connection very simple for how do we connect this gas to the world? The answer is simple. Let's build an LNG facility and the associated pipelines to connect that gas field to the world. That makes it very clear that the gas that's being produced is the best.
Currently, the benchmark, the global benchmark in terms of emissions is Norway. How do you compare yourself with what they have achieved?
EQT has a gold standard, and our methane emissions intensity is 5 times better than what we need for that standard.
Okay.
And we're still taking actions to make that even better. So it'll be ultimately 10 times better than the standard. All of this talk about methane emissions is going to put EQT in a position where we have set a net zero goal for scope 1 and 2 by 2025. Now, the reason why we do that is because we cannot let the conversation about the emissions associated with making our product overshadow the emission reduction benefits when people use our product. And for perspective, our carbon footprint, our scope 1 and 2 at EQT is about 450,000 tons. We're going to make that net zero. But 450,000 tons is what it takes for us to run the rigs, run our completion crews, and produce an amount of product that when that product is put on the world stage to replace foreign coal, will have an emissions reduction benefit of negative 150 million tons. So 450,000 of cost, for 150 million of benefit, you know, we're gonna be very aggressive in minimizing this, and that's why we're so aggressive with our net zero targets. Is because the conversation needs to be on the big needle movers, and that's what happens when people use our product.
Yeah, and Tim, just to put numbers.
What's happening on the pipeline side?
On the midstream side, I mean, we move a third of the gas from the wellhead all the way to the burner tip and all the way to the water in the LNG terminal. I mean, our emissions footprint is around 12 million tons per year. We have a project in Louisiana to decarbonize our Haynesville production, our transportation and LNG exports, and remove 2 million tons of CO2 per year. I mean, that's one project taking 20% of the emissions out of a third of the natural gas transportation in the United States. Toby's exactly right. I mean, we are, and we are just getting started, but we recognize that methane and the emissions across the value chain have to be eliminated. The good news is we control that. The primary source of methane emissions for upstream production has been devices that emit methane intentionally, the way they were designed. We can replace those devices. In the midstream space, primarily intentional releases for maintenance purposes. You know, we didn't treat methane as a greenhouse gas, as a climate concern. So we designed our systems and operating practices to just vent the methane to atmosphere and perform maintenance activities. We control that. So our goal is not, this is not a, you know, we're not trying to make a statement here. We're focused on, we want to have end to end. We can pick up Toby's net zero production. We can move it through our vast network of, it's like a interstate highway system. We can move it through the on-ramps, the off-ramps. We can track the emissions with credibility, auditable, high integrity, high fidelity information, and we can deliver a certified product that we're going to demonstrate is the cleanest energy solution on the planet.
If I saw it correctly, your company also has joined OGMP 2.0, which is for the experts, the UN's standard for methane emissions. A lot of, or many European companies are also joining this standard. So this is a clear signal, I think.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I hope that if there's one message we're bringing to Europe is that people like Toby, you know, EQT, Williams, I mean, I consider myself an environmentalist. And I think when Toby says, you know, we don't need to focus in this industry, we do it because we look at the math, we look at the data, and it's pretty clear to us that if we can address methane emissions and bring this product to the world, I'll give, you know, in the United States, over the last 15 years, we've driven down CO2 emissions as a result of natural gas displacing coal. Single largest contributor of reducing emissions in the United States last 15 years, equivalent to removing 100 passenger vehicles from the road each and every day. There is no other technology on the planet that has been able to achieve that kind of results with an affordable, reliable solution. So it is not a theory. We know it's a fact that natural gas can displace dirty fuels and can lead decarbonization efforts. Now we need to bring that to a much larger scale, because although we've reduced emissions over the last 15 years, 1 year of incremental coal in China wiped out all of the emissions benefits we've achieved over the last 15 years as a country. That's the issue.
Let's move further downstream to the LNG liquefaction plants. Fred, what are your members working on, and what's the footprint of this important element of the LNG value chain?
Well, there's obviously a number of initiatives, Tim, that are underway. Just to underscore what my friends and industry colleagues have said, the oil and gas industry in the United States has openly embraced the direct regulation of methane by our Environmental Protection Agency. We've been working with EPA for a couple of years on new regulations. There's a huge number of voluntary initiatives globally and in the United States. We've been working extremely closely with the team at our Department of Energy that is working to harmonize some of the global schemes with regard to methane, to bring them all into a greater sense of alignment. So there's those things that are happening. With regard to the LNG industry itself, there's a number of things that can be done. It takes somewhere between 5 and 10% of the natural gas that goes into an LNG facility to actually chill the gas so that it becomes liquid, right? And so there are some ways to approach that. You can optimize those systems, which one of the projects under construction is doing. You can move from gas-driven turbines to produce that power to create the LNG to turbines that are electrical, that pull specifically renewable energy from parts of the grid. And there's lots of renewable energy in Texas and where the gas is produced. Carbon capture at the facilities is a little bit more difficult. It's a little bit more expensive at the moment. But I got to tell you, to kind of underscore what Toby was saying about net power, net power is an amazing breakthrough technology. And it's so when you look at the full life cycle of US LNG, our emissions, whether it's methane or CO2 in the United States, is something like 25 to 30%. So 70 to 75% of the full life cycle is at the receiving end of things. And so if you think about it, if we can address that 70%, we can get in every single instance where there's a power plant or an industrial facility that uses US LNG for power, if it's a net power kind of project, can capture that CO2, reliably put it underground, then that really gets to the center of to the heart of the problem. We're doing everything. You've heard from a best producer in America. You heard from the best pipeline company in America. We're moving forward on that, and it's going to be amazing results over the next. We're already in a great place. We're going to be a terrific place in the next 5 to 7 years, and then after that, it's on the receiving end.
Yeah.
Thank you, Fred. Mary, one question on regulation. So we have in Brussels quite intensive discussions on methane strategies and maybe even regulations in terms of carbon border adjustment mechanisms and other ideas. Do you think this is beneficial to the discussion because it sets clear targets or would you rather say this is hindering free trade situation?
I think it probably is a good practice or a good idea. Shouldn't say practice, a good idea. The U.S. has thought about the same things with a border adjustment, border adjustment fee to incentivize.
Okay.
But you'd have to be careful to set the target correctly, low enough to really move where you want to move to, but not too low that you prevent the industry. Because there's some people who are using methane to just shut down, the excuse of methane, saying it can't be addressed, to shut down natural gas. So I think there are international targets that have been set. And I think that these two companies and others in our coalition have already met them, or we are already exceeding the international targets.
And the long-term goals as well. I mean, the meetings we're having, again, when I said things seem very compatible, I don't think we're at odds in having the same goals around decarbonization and the pace of decarbonization. I think whether or not natural gas is a long-term solution is something that we want to educate folks on better. But in the near term, the next 10, 15 years, I don't think we're going to have any daylight between us in our drive to decarbonize and to lower methane and CO2 emissions. And so I see the things that are happening. We're hoping there's more collaboration and we get it right together, but I don't see that we can achieve
Tim,
that.
one thing I would say on regulating carbon, when we think about the energy ecosystem, it needs to be cheap, needs to be reliable, needs to be clean. We've got incentives on cost, we've got incentives on carbon. If we need to apply either a penalty or a carrot or a stick on the reliability. Because these three things need to get in balance. When they don't get in balance, and when the reliability is sacrificed for the benefit of the clean aspects of a grid, security gets compromised, and negative things can happen. So I think in addition to talking about the carbon aspect of things, what are we doing to incentivize the reliability nature? And this is a part of the conversation that is significantly lacking as far as the focus point, but natural gas needs to be leading in thinking of ways to get the credit for the reliability that we bring, because it's just as critical as the cost, and it's as critical as the clean aspects of the grid.
We're almost at the end. We're already beyond 1 hour, but let me finish our discussion with a short round on the far future. You're aware of the Green Deal in Europe, climate neutrality by 2050. Germany is more ambitious, climate neutrality by 2045. As a producer of fossil fuel, does that scare you?
No, it's exciting actually, because it just means that natural gas has got to win the race. And I don't care what type of energy that you produce. If you're in wind, you're in solar, you're in batteries, you're in oil and gas, you're in nuclear, we're all in the same race. And that race is to be the first energy source that can truly deliver the trifecta of energy: cheap, reliable, zero carbon energy. And so no energy source has figured that out yet. I mean, nuclear's got to figure out how to lower the costs. Solar and wind has to figure out reliability, batteries and hydrogen. I mean, and natural gas needs to figure out how to go for, we know it's cheap, it's reliable. How do we make it zero carbon? Well, I'm excited because we've got carbon capture opportunities. We've got the technology. We've got the ability to do hydrogen. I think when the smoke clears, natural gas is going to be the first zero carbon energy solution. We're already well on our way. So, these goals being 2045 don't concern me. What does concern me, though, is if people use these to prevent having all options available. Let's not forget, we are in an energy crisis right now. We do not have our security. So let's make sure we put all of our players on the playing field. Let's incentivize and be clear about our desire for cheap, reliable, zero carbon energy. But let's make sure we get our best players on the field. And those field.
And let's put our best players on the field, our best players. And that's what we want to be a part of. We're not the only player, but the best, but the best players.
And Tim,
your perspective on climate neutrality, what happens with the pipelines?
Well, look, I mean, Williams started in 1908. We're barely, there weren't cars on the road in 1908. The company wasn't doing in 1908 what we're doing in 2023. And I expect us and want us to be a proud company in 21-23. We're not going to be doing in 21-23 what we're doing today, but we're already starting to think about what does the next generation and the next century of energy look like. It's not going to look like what we're doing today. And we're just getting started on this next evolutionary challenge. I mean, my oldest son is just going off to college. He's 18 years old. And when I sit down and talk to him, my hope for him is that when he comes out of college 4 years from now, he looks around and says, how do I solve the world's greatest challenge? How do I bring people out of energy poverty around the world while at the same time reduce emissions and save our planet from a climate crisis? Like, that's what German engineering has improved the world for the better. American ingenuity has improved the world for the better. That's what this industry can do if we're thinking near term, how do we decarbonize the existing ecosystem? Long term, how do we evolve this system to be zero carbon and to grow the energy that we produce and deliver and do it in a way that solves our climate goals? And I think the challenge we've had most recently is it's felt like people thought those were two exclusive concepts. We can do both. If we come together and agree that that's the challenge we're going to take on, we can do both. So I hope you're hearing from us, like, we're committed to solving. It's not, hey, we don't want you to achieve, carbon neutrality. It's okay. How do we do that together? How do we use the tools that we have to accelerate that reality?
Mary, to wrap up and to conclude our discussion with your political experience, what is your advice to bridge the gap between these different perspectives? We have an industry developing things. We see pragmatic solutions for the short term. We have these still ongoing energy crisis, and we have the long-term goal of climate targets. How do we negotiate and navigate in these very difficult situations?
Well, more conversations like we've had in these last few days, with literally leaders from the US and the industry and environmental and think tank groups and leaders here. The German Marshall Fund has facilitated this conversation with every different aspect of your political system. We're headed to Brussels tomorrow to talk with European leaders. So more of those, a stronger transatlantic relationship, which maybe both of our countries took a little bit for granted, than the Russian a catastrophe happened, which will continue. They are not committed to democratic ideals and values, not today, not tomorrow, not yesterday, and probably not in the near future. We need to be clear about that and really work to bring our democracies in European West, East of Europe and the US, and our partners, Canada is here with us. So, we just need more real conversations and practical solutions to this. My second thing is either the US shouldn't or Europe kick out the incumbent industry. The incumbent industry is some of the best engineers, scientists on the planet. And if we would just work in a more cooperative way, environmental leadership with industry leadership, and set the goals, tough goals, lower emissions, I think our countries can do it. We've done great things in the past. We can do this, but I'm very encouraged, actually. So that's what I'm thinking.
Thank you very much for sharing these deep insights, this progressive thinking, and of course also for touching all the difficult questions, which is of course proving the point that you're making. We need these kind of discussions. We need to exchange our ideas and explain what we're doing to master all the various challenges. Thank you very much, dear panel. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to us. I thought this was a very wonderful and insightful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.